question I have, which is more about Shark Tank, is you had no valuation, as I said. So why do they make such a big deal of putting money in on valuation? Did they explain that to you?
Valuations on the show, you can walk in with anything. Before you go on the show, they actually have an investment expert that will ring you and coach you through, you know, what your valuation is, what they think it's worth. If you're too high, they'll try and bring you back down. So I was sitting, I think I was going to go in and ask for about 180,000 initially. And he said to me, look, your pre-sales, the chances of you getting one of these guys on board at that high amount that you're asking for, and the valuation I was asking, I think, was about $1 million. He said, you're not going to have much opportunity. They'll be all out. You'll walk away with no one. How about you bring down the valuation? He said, I'm not telling you to do that, but he coached me into realising what the value was having, you know, one of those sharks on board, what the value of the company was, and how, you know, dropping that price and the amount that I was asking for would have actually, you know, made it more of a feeding frenzy in the tank. So you do get support from Shark Tank on one side, and on the other side they also have a psychologist who works with you in case it doesn't go exactly as you plan in the tank, because they can be quite tough in there.
Part B to that is, what if it wasn't enough money for that innovation? Because it's one thing to ask, then you can't get it off the ground, can you?
That's right. And I knew that $76,000 was not going to be enough. So, you know how I did renegotiate out of the tank? One thing you need to remember is when you go in there, you can say yes to a deal, but it doesn't necessarily have to go through. Only 1/3 of deals that get made on Shark Tank actually go through in the real world. So there's a due diligence process after the tank where you swap all your information. You know, the shark will go through it with a fine-tooth comb. They have a whole team behind them that does that. So, you know, if you even tell a lie in the tank, they'll find it. You know, and that'll be one opportunity for them to pull out of the deal. There's been a lot of those that have happened. People feel the pressure in the room. Like I said, you've just got to go in there, give it your best shot, and hope for the best.
Thank you each for your brilliant presentations. Sometimes I get writer's block and I don't know what I want to write. Do you ever get ideas block, and how do you break it?
Who wants to have a go?
Yeah, so the couple of things that we do is we're consciously aware of where ideas come from. You know, so you have critical thinkers that sit by themselves and think quite independently. You've got process thinkers that like to work things out during a process, collaborators that like to work in teams and groups, and contextual thinkers that like inspiration, visual inspiration, and so forth. So we kind of deliberately create environments that bring those ingredients, knowing that with the right ingredients, things will flourish.
Yeah, we're sort of much the same, actually. We have sort of a lot of ingredients that we can use at different times to unlock things. In fact, there's some great resources online which I recommend everyone goes hunting for. So Hyper Island, for example, has an online toolbox that has a lot of exercises you can run. So for example, we do like speed ideation, which is a bit like speed dating, where we've got problem solving around the room. We have different people come in and work with us. So with Fire Blanket, we've been working with scientists and firemen. We've also been bringing in like special effects coordinators, have nothing to do with fire. Really just to sort of have a different perspective in the room. But we also, what we do is we control the room quite a bit as well. What I find is that, you know, Roger mentioned this earlier, you know, you've got a mixture of extroverts and introverts, and you've got to let introverts get a voice and extroverts stop and think. And so we put a lot of careful planning into those sessions. In the early days, it was like, let's have a brainstorm, and everyone piled into a room, and they'd always fail. Whereas what we do is we sort of tend to really structure minute by minute, and also give ourselves room to kind of guide. So we find that tends to unlock. You still get situations where things come to a grinding halt, but normally you go and do a thumbs up type exercise that sort of just unlocks the brain. So it's good.
We actually use a technique called brain shifting as well. So we will get, and that introvert-extrovert idea is quite important, because there's ideas great ideas that come from everybody in the room, but introverts aren't as, and there's nothing wrong with being an introvert or an extrovert, or the new one now, an ambivert. There's nothing wrong with not having that loud voice, but we give people the opportunity by posing what the problem is, or I prefer the unicorn approach, Roger knows that, the big sky thinking, but we get the introverts and the extroverts to contribute ideas on their own. We usually time people as well, because what we find is that if you give people too much time to come up with an idea, they're too critical. So we'll do a separate session where they write ideas on their own, then they'll throw them in the mix on the table. There's lots of different techniques, as Ben said, and lots of different resources. Another question?
Hyper Island Toolbox. So if you Google that, it should pop up.
The gentleman from PKF put up a slide, I think it was from Bernard Salt, that demonstrated that, you know, our most valued organisations aren't particularly new, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around what the hell's going on in Australia and why is that the case?
I'm really excited about Australians' ability to sort of to crack the innovation space, and there's lots of companies that are doing extremely well and are scaling. I think part of the problem has been that we're so fragmented. We actually did a tender to the government last year to propose essentially like a central resource for entrepreneurs where they could get all the information they needed to work through valuations, to work through how you go into another country. I mean, we've got the ideas boom, which is it's got its own momentum, and they've started to put bases now into other countries. But for example, you know, the UK and Israel has had bases in the States for years, so that entrepreneurs from those countries could go there, have a safe house, for want of a better description, get the help they need to scale and sort of move forward. Whereas here it's been about persistence and drive and people really just working everything through rather than actually being given some tried and tested routes that sort of do help you move forward. I think with that slide, it's quite alarming really when you see it like that. But then we've also got extremely amazing examples like Atlassian, and the fact that what they're looking to do, which is to sort of, you know, help people throughout the country sort of drive their ideas forward, and their software at its very heart is about collaboration and different thinking. So I don't think it's doom and gloom. I just think the thing is we've been slow to create the petri dish for everyone to sort of, I don't know, grow together. Instead, we've just got all these people growing individually. And I think that's where the challenge is, whereas everyone else has been quite, you've got, what is it, Silicon Roundabout in London, you've got Silicon Valley, which we all know really well. Israel's a thriving hub. And obviously we've got Sweden and Denmark up there as well.
I think, you know, in Australia, we tend to stick with what works. We don't step away. And just looking at that list, for me, it was, you could see where the innovation, and in the US, it was happening because they, like the American dream, it is to be an entrepreneur. It is to innovate, particularly in the tech space. So in Australia, we're really missing out. The government is not funding us enough in our innovation and in our quest to drive us forward. So there's just that little, you know, there's a part missing. People need the money and they can't get it. And for me, that's the simple truth.
I suppose my take's a little bit different. I would draw a distinction between quality and quantity. So I'm not always going to associate the biggest companies in the world as necessarily having the quality. I think Australia's got awesome quality for innovation and for thinking. I see that sort of everywhere. If you just take us as a microcosm, you know, we've put on 100 people in the last 12 months and we have no plans to go anywhere as an organisation. But when we launch a product venture, Australia is just a test market for us. We are always launching global and normally North America first, and we'll probably embed that company in North America, okay? But the brains are right here. So I think just make sure we're looking at the right stats when we look at some of that stuff.
And it's interesting, I go to the Boston Innovation Conference, which is in May in Boston. And I do some work with them. But one of the comments that often comes back from the people in the US is that they think we're doing it better than they are, which I find, I just agree with them, of course, but I find that whole perception of what they think of us quite incredible because we have that perception of them. And I think the dollar stats, going back to what Jen said, is something like Israel invests $12 per capita in innovation. Australia invests $1.20 or something like that per capita in innovation, even though our funding has it's probably gone up a little bit since then, since the government announced some of the new grants and research funds and things like that. But they're not easy to get. They're really not easy to get. It's nearly 9:20, and I kind of said to everybody we'd be gone by 9:15. I would really like to thank you all for coming out this morning. Thank you so much to PKF, to the team there that have helped put this morning on. Thank you so much for coming. Have a chat to Louise about her book. The speakers are going to be here for another 10, 15 minutes if you want to have a chat to them. However, I do need to get a group shot first. So thank you for coming. Please send me one of your takeouts. I will put an infographic together. Could you please thank Roger Langsdon, Jennifer Holland, Ben Cooper. And my very great appreciation to PKF and also to the venue, Smart Arts Gallery. Thanks, guys. Absolutely amazing space. And again, thanks, Pete. Okay, thank you.